Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're going really deep, exploring a market you might not have on your radar, global railcar movers.
Railcar movers, yeah.
And we've got a super detailed market report with projections going all the way out to 2031 and beyond. We're talking about some serious future gazing here.
It is, and it's packed with insightful numbers.
It is, and our goal is to, well, I mean, we're going to deep dive into this report,
Of
right?
course, of course. We're going to pull out the most important stuff, the insights you really need to know.
Yeah, the key figures.
And we want to make sure you grasp not just like the sheer size of this market right now, but really understand where it's headed.
And what's driving it? What's making it tick?
Absolutely. The forces behind the growth.
Exactly. So let's jump right in with some of those headline figures that really caught our eye. The report estimates the global railcar mover market will hit, get this, USD 1,524.6 million in 2025.
A pretty hefty number.
And here's where it gets really interesting. By 2031, that number is projected to balloon to USD 2369.21 million. We're talking about a compound annual growth rate, that's CAGR, of 6.50% between 2025 and 2031.
That's a pretty solid growth trajectory. It tells you there's some serious momentum.
There is.
Definitely. And when you break down that global market, regionally, you start to see some really interesting variations.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Dynamics are different all over the place. So right now, North America is holding the biggest share. It's over 40% of the market, with a size of USD 609.84 million in 2025. But their projected growth is a bit more, I guess, modest, you could say, 4.7% annually between 2025 and 2031.
So North America's the big player, but maybe not the fastest growing.
Yeah, exactly.
So where's the real action? Where's that growth engine?
Well, Europe comes in second in 2025, valued at USD 457.38 million. They're looking at a 5.0% CAGR. But then there's Asia Pacific.
Ah, yes, Asia Pacific.
Now, this is where it gets really exciting.
I was going to say they always seem to be the ones to watch.
They are.
So what's their story?
Well, in 2025, they're estimated to reach USD 350.66 million, which is about 23% of the global total, but
their projected CAGR is through the roof, right?
it is a remarkable 8.5% from 2025 to 2031, fastest growing region by a long shot.
8.5%. That is huge growth. What's fueling that kind of a surge in Asia Pacific? What's going on over there?
Well, we'll dig into the regional specifics later on, but in a nutshell, it's rapid industrialization, massive infrastructure projects, and this relentless demand for more efficient logistics. That part of the world is just booming.
Yeah, it really is. And to be clear, this report isn't just focused on Asia Pacific, right? There are some interesting growth pockets in other regions as well.
Oh, absolutely. Latin America, for example, is projected to hit USD 76.23 million in 2025 with a 5.9% CAGR. And then there's the Middle East and Africa, which is smaller at USD 30.49 million, but still showing a respectable 6.2% CAGR.
Right, so lots of different dynamics happening globally. And just so our listeners have a good sense of the time frame, this report uses 2024 as its base year,
Yes, 2024.
with historical data going back to 2021 and forecasts going all the way up to 2033. So we're really getting a pretty clear picture of the past, present, and future of the market.
Exactly. It gives us a solid context to work with.
Now let's get to the really crucial part. What's driving this growth? The report identifies a few key drivers.
Yeah, the engines behind the numbers.
Right, so let's tackle the first one, increased freight traffic. Seems pretty logical, right? If more goods are being transported by rail, you need more equipment to handle all those rail cars.
It's pretty fundamental. It boils down to this. Economies are expanding, international trade is growing, and that means a massive increase in the volume of goods transported by rail. It puts a huge strain on rail yards and industrial facilities to just keep things running smoothly. And that's where railcar movers come in. They're essential for managing that increased workload efficiently.
Okay, it's all about keeping up with the flow of goods. Makes sense. The second driver is the growth in labor shortages. We're seeing this across a lot of sectors, not just rail.
Right, it's a widespread issue.
But how does a shortage of workers specifically impact the demand for railcar movers?
Well, when companies are struggling to find and keep enough people to manually move and manage railcars, they start looking for alternatives. They need solutions.
And automation is a pretty obvious one.
Exactly. Railcar movers can handle those tasks with fewer people, often faster and more consistently, making them a much more attractive investment when staffing is a major challenge. It's all about doing more with less manual effort.
Right, it's about that efficiency. And the third key driver is increasing safety concerns. The rail industry is obviously very focused on safety, so how do modern railcar movers fit into that equation? How do they help make things safer?
Well, modern railcar movers are loaded with advanced safety features and technologies.
Oh yeah, they're not your granddad's railcar movers, are they?
No, they're not. They've come a long way. And by automating or, assisting in the movement of these really heavy rail cars, they dramatically reduce the risk of accidents and injuries that can happen during manual handling. It's all about creating a safer work environment.
So those are the positive forces driving growth, the tailwinds, so to speak. But what about the challenges? Are there any obstacles that might slow things down?
Oh, definitely. The report highlights a couple of significant ones. The first is the upfront cost.
Okay, that makes sense. We're talking about industrial equipment here, not something you just pick up at the hardware store.
Exactly. It's a big investment, especially the high-tech ones, the automated models.
Right, the ones with all the bells and whistles.
Precisely. So that can be a real barrier for, say, smaller companies or businesses with tighter budgets.
Right, they might not have the capital to just jump in.
No. And the second hurdle is the increasing complexity of the technology. As these railcar movers become more sophisticated, with AI and autonomous capabilities, it takes a higher level of expertise to operate and maintain them, not to mention repair them when something goes wrong.
Yeah, that specialized knowledge can be hard to come by.
It can, so that's another challenge that the industry needs to address.
So we've got these forces pushing the market forward, we've got the challenges holding it back. Now let's look ahead. What trends are going to shape the future of the railcar mover market?
Well, the report points to two main trends.
Okay, lay 'em on me.
First is the adoption of autonomous railcar movers.
Autonomous. Now we're talking. It's like something out of a sci-fi movie.
It kind of is, but it's real, and it's happening.
So what kind of an impact are we expecting to see from these autonomous movers?
Well, they can totally revolutionize rail yard operations. Think about it. You minimize the need for human intervention.
So we're talking increased efficiency, lower operating costs.
Exactly. And potentially even better safety because you've got those precise automated movements. It's similar to what we're seeing with self-driving cars, but in a much more controlled environment.
Right. It's a perfect setting for that kind of technology to really take off. And what's the second trend?
It's all about integration, integrating railcar movers with all these other advanced technologies.
So what, like Internet of Things?
Yes, but also sophisticated data analytics and artificial intelligence. The idea is we have real-time performance monitoring, predictive maintenance to avoid breakdowns, and just generally optimize every aspect of rail yard operations.
So the future of railcar movers is smart and connected.
Absolutely.
Now let's break down the market a bit, starting with how these movers actually operate. What different modes of operation are out there?
Well, according to the report, manual operation is still the most common.
Okay, that makes sense. Manual movers are probably a lot more affordable.
Yeah, they're a good entry point, especially if you have a simpler operation or a limited budget. They still offer a good balance of efficiency without the big investment in automation.
Right, so there's still a viable option, but I'm guessing there's a particular mode of operation that's really taking off.
You guessed it, it's the automatic segment.
Automation, of course.
Yep. And it's growing fast, mainly because of the demand for improved safety, increased efficiency, and reduced reliance on manual labor. Automation includes everything from partially automated systems to fully autonomous AI-powered movers. It's streamlining how rail cars are moved and switched, reducing human error, and boosting productivity.
So while manual's still common, the future definitely seems to be pointing toward more and more automation.
Definitely.
Now, what about the type of tracks these movers run on? Are there different types?
Yes, there are. The most common are narrow gauge and standard gauge.
Okay, so what's the difference?
Well, narrow gauge has a smaller distance between the rails than standard gauge. You often find them in tight spaces, like small factory yards and warehouses. They're good for navigating those cramped areas.
Makes sense. And which type is more popular?
Right now, the narrow gauge segment has the largest share.
Oh, okay, so it's the more specialized one that's more popular at the moment.
It is. But standard gauge is the fastest growing.
Interesting. Why is that?
Well, standard gauge is the most common track width used for main railway lines around the world. It's the standard for a reason. It's versatile and can handle a huge range of railcar types and applications. So as rail networks grow and evolve, so does the demand for standard gauge movers.
Okay, so it's the workhorse of the rail world.
Exactly.
Now, let's talk about what actually powers these railcar movers. What types of propulsion are out there?
Well, you've got your fuel-powered ones.
Okay, so like gasoline or diesel.
Right, and those are currently dominant, mainly because they're reliable and can run for a long time without refueling.
That makes sense. You need something you can depend on, especially if you're in a remote area where you can't just plug in.
Exactly.
But with the whole world going green, I'm assuming there's a shift happening in propulsion as well.
Oh yeah, definitely. The fastest growing segment is the hybrid and electric category.
Hybrid and electric. No surprise there.
No, there's a big push for sustainability everywhere, and rail is no exception. Plus, they're quieter, have lower or zero emissions, and can save you money on fuels in the long run.
Right, all those factors are appealing. Now let's talk about the power these movers can actually exert. What's the technical term for that again?
Tractive effort.
Right, tractive effort. So what are the different categories for that?
Well, you have low capacity and high capacity.
Okay, so what's considered low capacity?
Low capacity usually refers to movers that can pull up to 45,000 pounds. They're more affordable, smaller, and often used in places like small train yards or warehouses where the rail cars are lighter.
So they're good for those less demanding tasks.
Exactly. But high capacity, that's where the growth is.
High capacity. So what kind of pulling power are we talking about there?
Anything over 45,000 pounds, these are the heavy-duty movers.
Right, the ones you need for the really big jobs.
Exactly. They're crucial for industries like mining, heavy manufacturing, and ports where you need to move large, heavy rail cars.
So as those industries grow, so does the demand for high-capacity movers.
Exactly.
Now, let's talk about how these railcar movers are actually used. What are the main applications?
The biggest one is loading, unloading, and repositioning rail cars.
That's pretty straightforward.
It is. It's all about streamlining logistics, reducing downtime, and making sure goods are moving efficiently through the system.
Right, keeping everything flowing. And what application segment is seeing the most growth?
It's actually the use of forklift trucks in conjunction with railcar movers.
Forklift trucks. So it's a team effort.
It is. Forklifts are being used more and more to speed up the loading and unloading process. They're also helpful for handling smaller railcars.
Right, so it's about using the right tool for the job.
Precisely.
Finally, let's talk about who's actually buying these railcar movers. Who are the main end users?
Right now, the oil and gas sector is the biggest customer.
Makes sense. They move a lot of materials by rail.
They do, and railcar movers are essential for moving those materials safely and efficiently.
Right. So which end user segment is growing the fastest?
That would be mining. They rely heavily on rail transport for moving massive amounts of minerals and raw materials.
So as the demand for those raw materials goes up, so does the demand for railcar movers.
Exactly.
Okay, that gives us a really good overview of the global market and all its different pieces. Now let's zoom in on some of those regional highlights. What stood out to you?
Well, starting with North America, which, as we mentioned, holds the biggest share.
Right, 40-something%, I think.
Yep. The U.S. market is estimated at USD 481.16 million in 2025 with a 4.5% CAGR. It's being driven by industrial growth across a lot of different sectors.
Makes sense. They've got a diverse economy. What about Canada?
Canada's market is smaller, USD 73.18 million, but their growth is a little higher, 5.5%. They're investing in railway modernization and infrastructure.
Right, they're trying to stay ahead of the curve. And Mexico?
Mexico's at USD 55.50 million with a 5.2% CAGR.
Okay, so across North America, it's all about increased freight traffic, automation, and a focus on sustainability.
Now, what about Europe? They're a major player too, right? Yes, their market size in 2025 is USD 457.38 million with a 5.0% CAGR. Within Europe, the UK is at USD 76.84 million with a 5.8% CAGR.
Okay, so a little higher growth there.
Yeah, they need really efficient logistics solutions because it's a smaller, denser country.
Right, space is at a premium.
Exactly. Germany's a big market too, USD 90.56 million with a 5.2% CAGR. They have a really strong industrial base, and they're constantly developing their infrastructure.
Makes sense. What about France?
France is at USD 42.88 million with a 4.2% CAGR. Italy at USD 39.33 million with a 4.4% CAGR, and Russia at USD 70.89 million with a 4.0% CAGR. Spain and Luxembourg are showing slightly higher growth, 4.1% and 5.1% respectively.
Okay, so overall, Europe is all about modernization, sustainability, and that balance between power and emissions.
Exactly.
Now let's talk about that growth superstar, Asia Pacific.
Ah, yes. 8.5% CAGR. China is leading the charge with a USD 157.80 million market in 2025 and an 8.0% CAGR. They're embracing automation and technology like crazy, plus they've got so much industrial activity going on.
Right, they're the factory of the world.
In a lot of ways, yeah. India's another big one, USD 42.08 million with a whopping 10.3% CAGR.
Wow, 10.3%. That's incredible.
It is, and they've got these stricter environmental regulations that are pushing them toward cleaner solutions.
Right, so that's a factor there.
Definitely. Japan's at USD 48.39 million with a 7.0% CAGR. South Korea at USD 35.07 million with a 7.6% CAGR. And Australia at USD 18.23 million with an 8.2% CAGR thanks to their huge mining sector.
Right, they're a resource powerhouse.
They are. And then you have Southeast Asia and the rest of the Asia-Pacific region also showing really strong growth. What's interesting is that while they're adopting new technologies, they're still using a lot of fuel-powered movers.
Right, because they might not have the electric infrastructure in place yet.
Exactly.
Okay, so Asia Pacific is a mixed bag. Lots of growth, but they're still working out the best solutions for their specific circumstances.
Exactly. Now, what about South America?
South America, another interesting region. What are their numbers looking like?
Their 2025 market size is USD 76.23 million with a 5.9% CAGR. Brazil's the biggest market in the region at USD 32.63 million with a 6.5% CAGR. They're focused on fuel efficiency and getting the most out of their existing rail networks.
Right, it's about optimization.
Yeah. Argentina's at USD 12.81 million with a 6.8% CAGR. They're urbanizing rapidly, so they need efficient freight transport solutions.
Makes sense. What about the other countries?
Colombia, Peru, and Chile are all showing solid growth too. The overall trend in South America is that manual movers are still prevalent, but they're expected to gradually shift towards automation as their rail infrastructure improves.
Okay, so it's a region in transition. What about the Middle East and Africa?
Their market size is smaller, USD 30.49 million in 2025, but still with a decent 6.2% CAGR. The GCC countries are the largest segment at USD 13.05 million with a 7.0% CAGR. They're looking for cost-effective and reliable solutions.
Right, practicality is key.
It is. South Africa is at USD 4.82 million with a 7.2% CAGR, driven by their urbanization and infrastructure projects. Egypt and Nigeria are also showing positive growth. And, interestingly, even in this region, the electric railcar mover segment is starting to gain traction.
So the shift towards sustainability is happening everywhere, even in regions where fuel power has been the norm. This has been a really fascinating look at a market that most people probably don't think about much.
It is. And it's so much more dynamic than you might expect.
Yeah, it's full of surprises. The main takeaway is that the global railcar mover market is full of growth opportunities. It's driven by a combination of things: rising freight traffic, those ongoing labor shortages, and that constant focus on safety improvements.
Exactly.
And it's important to remember that those drivers are playing out differently all over the world.
Absolutely. Every region has its own story.
Right. And to circle back to those headline numbers we talked about earlier, the global market is projected to grow from USD 1,524.6 million in 2025 to USD 2,369.21 million by 2031.
That's a massive leap. A 6.50% CAGR.
It is. So as we wrap up this deep dive, let's leave our listeners with something to ponder. We've talked about automation, autonomous systems, the demand for sustainability, and these different regional growth patterns. But what does it all mean for related industries? Think about rail infrastructure, logistics software, even the materials used to build these movers.
It's all connected.
It is. And how will these changes affect global trade? Will they make our supply chains more efficient? How will they reshape the way we move goods around the world? Those are some big questions to think about.
They are.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of railcar movers. It's a market that's on the move, and we'll be keeping a close eye on it as it evolves.
Definitely one to watch.
It is.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here.